got a couple more questions here. Let me just answer them. Let's see. Okay, have you invested in foreclosable tax liens in the past? I briefly hear people speak on the topic, but there is not much information available on how to get started. Is it true that a tax lien can be in the county inventory and once purchased, it can be immediately sold? So I think what we're talking about here are over-the-counter tax liens would be what I think you're talking about. And it sounds like what you're talking about would be over-the-counter tax liens that have been sitting on the books for longer than the redemption period is. So in other words, they have redemption periods that have expired and they're eligible for foreclosure. Some of this stuff, it might be true. I mean, at least in some ways. Technically, it might be true in that, yeah, there are properties, that is how it works. But you don't necessarily have a lot of over-the-counter liens that are just sitting there so much in states, because most of the states that offer liens will, offer those liens up publicly. Investors can buy them, and then the investors, once the redemption period expires, if the investor hasn't been paid back, then they can start to pursue foreclosure, on those individual properties. And again, that basically just gives the opportunity for the owner to either pay off delinquent taxes or the redemption period expires, and so the lien holder at that point can foreclose on the properties for what's owed in delinquent taxes and fees. So yeah, it is doable, but the issue is that the over-the-counter liens were really more they were a product of auctions prior to the internet. They were a product of counties trying to hold auctions and having more property available than they really had investors that were showing up to buy. And that's not so much a problem we have anymore now that auctions are moving online. And because of that, also a lot of the over-the-counter inventory that maybe existed in the past is also probably going to go away. Now, not everywhere. There's probably still areas where they're conducting their sales live and in person, and they still don't have a lot of people, attending it. And there may be over-the-counter opportunities in some of those areas, with tax lien states. But I don't know if I would say I'm trying to think about states here where you could potentially do it here.
Well, a state could be like Nebraska, for example. Only one county in Nebraska has their auction taking place online. So that could be an area. South Carolina, those auctions aren't held online. So there could be an opportunity. So whenever we're looking at it, there's even a couple of Florida counties that don't have online auction tax lien sales. Most of them do. So when we are looking for over the counters that we might be able to start the foreclosure on process quicker, it's going to be those areas where, and the states where online auctions aren't taking place. Indiana is another state where they don't have all of their online auctions, all of their counties using online auctions. So those are going to be the states that we would probably target. We have had students acquire property through tax lien certificates. We had one student that acquired a really nice property in Colorado. We had another student that acquired property in Maryland, actually a couple of different properties in Maryland, through purchasing over-the-counter tax liens and then waiting out the rest of the redemption period and then starting the foreclosure. But Shade's right, with a lot of these tax lien auctions coming online, that means that there's going to be less people, or there's going to be less over the counters, just by the fact that anyone can bid on these properties. So if it makes sense, it's a usable property where something like a building lot might have been ignored in the past because they were limited by how many people attended the live sale. Now it's an online sale, that's going to open it up to a lot more people to bid on them.
There was a question about where, what state and county were these properties auctioned off at, and this is the, this is the state and county right here. So it's Vanderburgh County, Indiana. This was the sale that they did. It was a sale here that started in August and wrapped up here in September, I think.
Yeah.
All right, well, let me see here. Let's see. Okay, now I use a guy on Fiverr who does pretty in-depth property title searches for each property for $10. Is there anything else you could recommend? So when it comes to something like Fiverr, it's kind of hit and miss. If you've got a guy that's doing a pretty good job for you at a good low price, then it's probably worth sticking with and using. Generally, though, when it comes to the steps that we use to kind of research the title, a lot of the people on Fiverr are going to be using the same resources you would use. So they're going to have access to the same records. But there are some people on Fiverr that may have access to additional search tools and records that make it a little bit easier for them to find some of that same information. And so really the main issue is whether you are hiring somebody that knows how to find the liens. If they do, then it's usually, they'll work out great. I mean, as long as they can find the liens that, that you're looking for, then, that's usually good enough. I don't know, we don't necessarily have to we don't have to go in crazy depth here in our title research, because we're usually not going back further than an owner or two. So we're usually not going back that far in time. We're just trying to figure out the recent history with the property so that we can figure out who we need to look for when we're looking for liens.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good answer to the question.
Yeah.
One thing to mention is Shade's reading the questions. Again, you guys all have the opportunity, the people that attended today, to sign up for a strategy session. So if you click the link in the description, we can go ahead and get you set up and give you a call and help answer any of the questions that we didn't go over today.
Yeah. Okay, let's see, other questions here. Okay, so if there is a property for sale, I found, and it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 5 acres for 150,000, not a tax lien, is there a way to contact or to contract that and sell it to an investor or rent it to own, then buy and take over the note? Is that a great way to start, or the auctions first? So yeah, actually what you're talking about there is what we would call a pre-foreclosure with tax sales, and they exist just like they do with bank foreclosures. So when we first started, when Steve was first working as a real estate agent, he worked in his office with a guy that had been a real estate agent, but basically had quit being an agent, let his license lapse because he was a full-time investor. And what he was investing in was what he called notice of defaults. And what this was, as soon as somebody would default on their mortgage, the mortgage company fills out, a default notice and turns it in there with the county. He would go and get those county notices of, the defaults. And then from there, just because you have a bunch of defaults doesn't mean that you necessarily have deals. He would pull up the properties, and then he would do the research to figure out how much was owed on each one of these properties for their mortgage. So if if the property was upside down, or if there was more money owed on the property, basically, or there was no money to be made, so if there was $200,000 mortgage on a $200,000 home, he would just ignore those because there wasn't anything he could do. But if there was properties there where it was a $60,000 mortgage on a $200,000 home, then that would be an individual that he would reach out and contact to try to put a deal together. And it's the same concept with tax sale properties. In that we have a list of individuals, they're about to lose their properties. With any of the tax sale list that we're looking at, there's nothing stopping you from being able to make contact with that individual and make some kind of an agreement with them on their property outside of the sale. So if you can make contact with the individual and get them to sell, then certainly you could do that. You could do that, and you could make money on it. You could probably do really well. Now we know that pre-foreclosures do happen with tax sales. There's no doubt about it. They do happen, and you could certainly use it as a strategy to try to pick up properties here before the sale. And as long as you pay off the property taxes, there are certain advantages to it even. In fact, you wouldn't have to go through quiet title because you'd still have a clear title. So that'd be one of the advantages right off the bat, is that you wouldn't have to go through and deal with all the title stuff. So yeah, you could certainly do deals like that. The bigger issue normally is just that, well, there are deals that can be made sometimes. Maybe people just need, the opportunity, they need the cash, and if you can work something out with them on the cash, on some kind of a loan for it, but you can make a deal like that work. But with some tax sale properties, you just have individuals that have passed away or just no longer there, and that's, it's going to be hard to work out a deal like that with those individuals. And so, yeah, certainly you can do pre-foreclosures though, and they will work just like they'll work with bank foreclosures. In fact, you could probably utilize pre-foreclosures in most counties that you're going to work, or try to do tax sale stuff. If you have enough time before the sale, a month before the sale or so, that's probably the main limitation you'd have. It's just making sure you have enough time to work out a deal if you can get somebody in contact with you.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's something that we teach our students how to do. We have a couple of different trainings. We have one that talks about how to do pre-foreclosures with structured property, but we also have a specific one that talks about how to doing the pre-foreclosure strategy with land. In fact, I think that that is a totally untargeted market as far as investors contacting landowners. Let's say that you find a $30,000 lot where they owe $2,000 or $3,000 in back taxes. They live out of state. If we're able to contact that owner and say, hey, your property's coming up for sale, it's going to be sold for back taxes here next month, I'd like to give you pay off your property taxes plus put an extra 3 or 4 grand in your pocket. A lot of these people are already letting the property go, and so the fact that they could make some money on the property is going to be a good deal. Plus, you get a warranty deed. So we've got to check for any liens or judgments or mortgages that could still attach to the property, and that's part of the process we talk about in the training is putting all of those things together to figure out what our profit margin would be. But something like a piece of land most of the time isn't going to have a mortgage on it, which means that we've automatically eliminated that. We could very well buy this free and clear, and we can get a warranty deed on it, which means we don't have to go through the quiet title process. So there's a great opportunity in doing that pre-foreclosure strategy.
Yeah, in fact, on average, tax sale properties almost never have mortgages against them. Most properties, if there is any kind of like lenders that are involved, or if there are other parties that are involved, then they usually avoid foreclosure altogether. But the properties that make it onto this list are generally properties that have no mortgage. And that's why they're foreclosed on. For mortgage, the foreclosure notices go out, but they're just going out to a limited number of people. That aren't responding, or maybe they can't respond because they're no longer here. So yeah, we see that with a lot of properties here, but yeah, none of these properties I think are going to have mortgages on them. Certainly if they make it through the foreclosure, they don't usually have anything like that on them. And it kind of makes sense if you look at them. A lot of these properties, you can understand the idea that somebody may have acquired this property 50 years ago or 70 years ago, and it's been paid off for a long time. And that's how I think it is with a lot of these properties. It's that they were just they were paid off long ago, and it's how they can end up on this list.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and really, this is a need. A lot of these properties, like Shade mentioned, the owners will find have died. In fact, that's one of the things that we see as we're going through and doing our due diligence and looking at the legal records is we'll find where people have passed away. We'll find death certificates. We'll find probate information. And if they don't have any heirs or haven't set that up and the house becomes abandoned, after a period of time, the county's going to go ahead and foreclose on it and put it on the market. And it's good to be able to bring a buyer in there to fix the property up, put it back into productive use. Otherwise, you're going to have squatters, you're going to have illegal activities done. And that's part of the reason where there is, a lot of abandoned properties in some of these cities. They're creating land banks to go in there and board the property up, to put them in touch with investors that are willing to buy these properties at a discount to fix it up so that it again becomes a productive property that can be used.
Yeah. Another good question here is, Onondaga County allows you to purchase through online auctions using a credit card. Do you have a list of states or counties that allow this? And other than looking through each one's rules individually, actually it's kind of a challenge because it's something that's changed just recently, and a lot of it has changed as counties have moved over to online auction systems, or as they switch over to new online auction systems. We've seen a lot of counties change their official policies for the funds that they collect and what they're willing to accept. More and more auctions though now are allowing buyers to pay using more online resources like credit cards. It's becoming far more common than it's ever been before, and a lot of times it's something that can go by state. So in other words, as we find counties here, in New York, they have online auctions where they'll allow credit cards. A lot of the other counties there within the state that are offering will also allow payment through the same method. On the flip side of that, like there are other states, where it is just kind of the opposite. But most of those are not dealing with online auctions. Most of the companies that are dealing with online auctions have to deal with that with good online methods of payment like that. Like Oklahoma, this year was still almost entirely cash. With everything they did, they wanted to deal with cash. All of these counties are doing the online auctions now are kind of the opposite, where they're trying to make it more convenient for buyers, to use things like their credit cards to pay. And I know for a lot of you, that also makes a difference, you want to be able to pay for things using a credit card.
Yeah, well, and kind of an answer to that as well is it's really difficult to make a list because each county is individual. And some of the counties we've seen may allow a credit card for the entire purchase, or may have a credit card that's used for the down payment. So, automatically they'll charge 10% or 15% of what the winning bid is, and then you've got a certain period of time to wire over or send them the rest of the funds. So really, we've got to check each one. We've got to do the exact same thing ourselves. We can put out and say areas like New York or like Michigan that will allow credit cards. But if we're talking about individual counties, we've got to check on an individual county level.
Let's see. How soon after auction for Illinois are results posted? That is a good question. I'm not sure how long it takes them before they actually post their results here from some of the auctions they've done. But they have had quite a few auctions here just recently in
Usually it's
Illinois.
a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so some of these, maybe coming up here, we could probably find out. Those are all the ones coming up here. We need to go to the ones that are past here.
You'd almost have to kind of know what the date was and then go back and look at the individual county.
Yeah.
I don't think they have a past sale there. So if we knew one of the counties had their auction last month, then we could go look at that county. If you go to the home page, we could pick that Illinois county. So let's say it was, Alexander County or whatever it is, one of these counties. You could go ahead and look at it and then see when it happened, and they'll provide us with the results.
Yeah, so we could, normally we'd be able to click on that auction there, for that county, and then when we go look at the results, they'll have the most recent sale listed, down there, and so we can click on that most recent sale and then see the results, like this. That's what you'll need to do there with some of those counties there, and yeah, they usually do have them listed there within a couple of weeks.
Well, and talking about over the counter, this is an area. See all of those properties that are available? Those are properties that can be picked up for around $850. So if we are talking about buying over the counter tax deeds, Illinois is a great state to look at because essentially they'll be about under $900 to purchase the over the counter deed. And if it's a good property, then it could definitely be worth, picking on or picking up and bidding on and winning.
Yeah. In fact, we can see we have these mobile homes from this point, I think.
Yeah, those are mobile homes.
Yeah, there are mobile homes there, and yeah, we could do the same thing here with any of the counties. So any of these that are holding sales or that will be holding sales, we can track here, and you can see when they did their last sale, when the results pull up. But usually it is within within a few weeks. So for instance, Will County is about to do their sale. We can see they have their sale listed there from 10/18 of last year. They're doing their sale around the same time this year. And so that will be up here pretty soon. But you could basically click on this, and within a couple of weeks here, it should be available, and you should be able to see the results here of the the 10/25 sale and what's still available.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's see. Land perk tests, etc. What's needed? What town needs to be able to show potential investors it's a good building lot? Oh, so it's a good question. We don't usually, so I guess when it comes to things like a perk test, it's usually a step that builders are going to go through, the property owner will go through before they before they do construction on their property. But it's not necessarily a test that we do often unless we're trying to develop the lot ourselves. We usually will allow that for the property owner. Um, and normally perk tests are not a problem with most lots, unless you have a lot that's really wet or has standing water or something, and then you could have an issue there with water, just like you could with any lot if there's water issues there with it. But yeah, we don't normally do the perk test. Normally what we'll do to check for usability is we're just checking the zoning requirements. So whatever it is that the zoning has listed as a mandated requirement for that that zoning district, or for that zoning qualification or classification. So residential 1, if it's R1 residential, there should be a square footage requirement, and there may be something like a width requirement or depth requirement, whatever it is. That's usually what we're basing our decision to buy on. And then when we turn around and sell, what we're usually including in that is just our knowledge that the property is usable. And so we might include, the information there about what the requirements are for use in terms of, how many square feet does it need to be? It's this many square feet, which it reaches, for usability. Yeah, we might list some of that information in our ad itself to let the buyer know as they're reading through it that it's a good usable property, and here's why.
Yeah, another thing to consider is that perk tests really have to do with building or installing a septic system. And so, that's the reason why you need a perk test in those kind of situations, is because they're going to be putting a septic system in the ground. So if we're looking at a lot of our building lots are in town limits, well, that means they're going to be able to be connected to the town sewer system. And if that's the case, we don't need a septic tank. So really, perk tests are going to be involved in more rural counties. And like Shay said, we're usually just going to sell it and let the buyer decide to do that. But if we were looking to get a higher price, maybe we're going through quiet title, we wanted to try to get our very best price on the property, and it's a more rural property that requires a septic system, that may be the one time that we would go ahead and have a perk test done. But if it's in the middle of town, it doesn't make any sense. You don't need it because they're not going to be doing a septic system.
Yeah. When wholesaling properties, after how many days do you start to think about changing your price or marketing strategy? So, we may consider changing up our pricing and stuff after, I don't know. I mean, I guess after a month or so, a month or two, we may start to think about other things that we do. We don't really panic though with properties. I mean, because we're pretty well planning on it, we plan on it taking a year to sell properties. So if we get interest, we can get them to sell for less, then, that's always a good bonus. Um, and so I don't know if
I would say if you're not getting a lot of traction every 60 to 90 days, it could be worth evaluating it. Maybe you need to add more pictures. Maybe you need to change the way that your ad is listed. Uh, you know, um, maybe you do need to drop the price. In fact, one thing that was interesting is I was working with my dad and my uncle years ago, helping them market some of their properties that they were selling. And, we had lots where he just kept dropping the price and he wasn't getting any action on it. So he had me start increasing the price. And I started increasing the price back up to what we had it by $5,000 each week. And suddenly he had a rush of buyers that had been looking at the actual lots or looking at these properties and interested in them. But now as they're starting to jump up in price, that actually created urgency and they were able to sell these lots. I couldn't believe it. I didn't believe. Are you sure you want me to do this? You want me to? Yeah, just keep. Every single month, every single week as we relist it, let's bring up the price, and it ended up selling all those properties because it did create a sense of urgency. So it's important to look at those ads, see who you're marketing to, and make sure that we use all of the free services that are available. Because as I said before, it's going to put them in front of different people's eyes. Different people are looking at Facebook than are looking at Craigslist. And there's probably different people looking at Zillow that are looking at Craigslist or Facebook. So, by using those different resources, we're at least getting it out to as many people as possible.
yeah, let's see, great questions here. If you have a real estate license in another state and you buy a property or you put a property on the MLS in Illinois, should you disclose your real estate license?
That one I'm gonna have to look up. It's been 20 plus years since I was a real estate agent. So I'd probably have to Google that one and find out for sure.
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know how applicable it is or exactly when it is that you're supposed to disclose versus not disclose. That is a good question.
I mean,
Yeah.
I could see it either way. I could see that it doesn't make a difference out of state, and maybe it does. Would probably have to do a little bit more research into answering that one.
Yeah, and yeah, we'll definitely have a replay out for everybody to view. So yeah, if you were just able just to get on late, then yeah, we'll have a replay out so that you can review that and get the parts that you missed.
Absolutely. Well, if we're not able to answer all your questions, if you have additional questions, go ahead and sign up for the strategy call. You can talk to one of our trainers. They can help answer any of those additional questions that you may have.
Yeah, and on the credit card question there, Grace, I'm not sure. Other than going to individual sites to check, we kind of have to do the same thing right now because it's changing with each one. So, but if it's an online auction, you definitely have a much higher chance at them accepting credit cards because it's usually the online auctions that are doing it. So that's one of the things we look at is with the online auctions. From there though, it's from auction provider to auction provider. And so, we're not usually going to know unless we look there in their auction terms. And even then, sometimes we have to dig into it a little bit to figure out, within their terms that they'll accept, the credit cards and you can pay with them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think that is everything. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining us here for this. And we look forward to doing it again here soon. And yeah, like Steve said, if we didn't get to your questions, feel free to send those in. We'd love to get to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, everyone. We appreciate you.
See you later.